It's time to take command with former NFL tight end Logan Paulsen and former Commanders beat reporter Craig Hoffman.
What's up? What's happening? Welcome in. It's the Take Command Podcast Jumbo Preview 2025 Season Edition. That's Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman. That's right, Logan. It's an early week pod. We're not doing a mailbag, but we are going to answer a whole lot of questions. All of them, in fact, about what the Commanders could be in 2025. Can you believe it? Training camp's here.
No, I mean, it's so funny when you start the offseason, you're like, man, we got so much time. And then it's just like at the blink of an eye and you're here. We're talking about football. We're getting ready for the season, which is obviously very exciting, but it does rip by very quickly.
It does. So we're recording this. I feel like this is relevant to timestamp this. It's 8:40 a.m. on Tuesday morning, July 22nd. The reason I say that is because obviously we're waiting on Terry McLaurin news. Don't know that we're going to get it, but we are waiting on it. And we are going to get Terry McLaurin news on some way. Like, I don't know that we're going to get a contract signed, but we're going to figure out whether he's holding out, holding in. Is there a trade request? Like, there'll be something today for sure as we figure out whether or not he reports to camp. And then Adam Peters and Dan Quinn are speaking this afternoon. So we'll have full reaction to that on the Hoffman Show, as well as all our other shows on the Team 980 and 106.7 The Fan. The other big story that's obviously floating out there is all the name and stadium stuff. We're not going to tackle that at all on this show today. We have had plenty of coverage of that on the radio stations as well. But like, this day is designed to be our preview, and we're going to stick to that. So if you're looking for coverage of that story, there's great places to find it. It's just not going to be here on Take Command today. So with that, Logan, the first thing that we want to talk about was the Von Miller signing, because we haven't had a chance to do it. We've both watched some tape on Von Miller. We are ready to talk about what he is at age 36. The first interesting thing, I think, is he is listed as an outside linebacker in the same exact way that Dante Fowler was last year. And to me, that is not coincidental. Like, obviously, Von has played stand-up most of his career as opposed to like a 4-3 edge. But he's an edge guy. But I do feel like the role will be fairly similar of what Dante Fowler had last year or was supposed to have last year. We know Fowler wound up playing a lot more due to injury and the fact that he played pretty well. But when you look at Von Miller on tape at the age of 36, you look what he did last year in Buffalo, yet another year removed from the ACL. What did you see from him, and what does he have left in the tank?
Yeah, I mean, I think the role you described is perfect for him, and I think that's exactly what you see on tape. I think that's like when you watch the Buffalo film, like you just like pull a clip, pull a game, right, and it has all his plays kind of parsed out, has the down and distance on there. They all say third down for the most part.
Yeah.
So like they were using him in the way that I think the Commanders are going to use him. Like you're looking for a guy who, again, I think he could still play on first and second down, but he's 36 years old. So how many reps do you want him taking in that capacity? And then in a game that's a pass-driven league, like, how do we affect the passer? And I think he's a guy that can still get that done. You know, I think he had 8 sacks, 7 sacks last year, something like that. I don't remember off the top of my head, but it's not an insignificant number for the amount of snaps that he's actually rushing the quarterback. And so I do think you get a guy who can win a one-on-one, and I think that's important. And I think he understands kind of the nuance of rushing the quarterback still, right? He understands like when the tackle is over leveraged, when he's not sitting on the line, when he can use that great spin move and get inside. He's still got enough vertical juice to win the edge. And he's got enough length and enough power to kind of bull and get after some people. So I think, again, he's not like, I think about Von Miller when I played against him, which was, 2012, 13, 14, and he was maybe the best defensive player in the league. He's definitely not that guy anymore, but he still has something to him, right? He's one of the better athletes to play outside linebacker in a long time. And I think that shows up. He has an athletic surplus. And really what you're getting is the pass rushing nuance, right? You're getting a guy who understands how to win multiple situations in a game. He understands, and he kind of seems to make the plays in the big moments, like, which is something that I think
we've talked about that a lot with like the great players like him, TJ Watt. Like, these guys just have a knack for doing. Aaron Donald famously in the Super Bowl, but also many other times. Like, when you need it, those are the guys that figure out a way to get it done.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think you look at him and you say, man, like this is exactly kind of what the doctor ordered. And I think it's something that I think you and I probably expected to happen. I actually thought this would happen later in training camp. But again, like, it's good that they got it done now so he can be here and kind of, become indoctrinated in the culture. But he brings a guy, and I think about like what you'd get out there, right? You get Duran, Kinlaw, Jerzon, you get Dorrance Armstrong, you get him, and then you get Frankie Louvu as a blitzer. And I think you've got 5 guys in pass rushing situations that could win on one-on-one. And that's exactly what you need. So, I think a lot of fans are stoked on the name. They should be. He's still a good football player. He's not the guy he was 10 years ago, but who is? And I think he fits kind of a perfect niche for this team at the moment. I expect to see Dietrich Rise and Cleveland Farrell in on first and second down. And then I expect him to come in and throw his pitch and win some reps and disrupt the quarterback.
Yeah, for sure. I think also when you watch him, I'm excited to see what happens for the other guys too. Like when you compare him to Dante Fowler, like Dante was a bit of a wild man, as we've talked about. There's a lack of discipline to his play. It still can produce at a very high level, but there is a boom or bust nature to the way Dante Fowler played the position. And I think one of the things that stuck out to me about watching some of Miller is like he looks like he'd be a joy to rush with. Like he's not going to get wildly out of his lane. Like there are times that you're like, oh, okay, he's the guy on this rep, and like he kind of has the freedom to do what he wants. But like that group in Buffalo rushed pretty well together. They had 20 sacks with him on the field last year. They had 6 of them were his. So but when you go sorting the snap numbers, or you go sorting the snaps in NFL Pro, and it's like, all right, I want Von Miller on the field, and I want plays that end in sacks. And there's 20 of them, and a lot of times he is a guy that helps create it for others. It's a stunt, and he's eating 2, and a linebacker loops around. So like Bobby and Frankie, like some of the stuff they could do with them looping around off of Von and the attention he's going to get, like that's good stuff. You see they kind of shaded to his side and created a one-on-one elsewhere. That guy's able to win. So if you're Daron Payne, you're Johnny Newton, you're Javon Kinlaw, and you're going to be someone rushing next to Von Miller in a way that was more predictable than rushing next to a guy like Dante Fowler, I think that's an exciting element of his game. Like to me, you just see the maturity in it, and like, oh yeah, this is a dude who understands how the league works, which is part of what made him great in the first place. But at the age of 36, like that's also how you stay around for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like I think there is an element of that, and I'd be curious to see how they coach him here and like what they want to get out of him. I think when you have a piece like this, and again, like Buffalo chose to use him in a very specific way, kind of as one piece of a whole. But I also think he's a guy that could still be your ace if you needed him to. And so I'm curious to see if they deploy him in like a lot of games, or they say, hey man, like go win, like get in a wide 9, go win, and we'll have Daron in a wide 3, and like let him win the one-on-one. You know what I'm saying? Like, are we just trying to find one-on-ones, or are we trying to rush as 4? And when I say trying to rush as 4, are we running games, or running a lot of line stunts? Or because again, you still need to, even though you're winning one-on-ones, you need to rush together to keep the quarterback in the pocket, obviously.
Right.
But I think like that'll be interesting to see kind of the direction they go with this. Because last year they kind of had to get to some different stuff because they didn't have a ton of pass rush juice. So I think that's the thing that I'm most curious about, is just like what does this change kind of Joe Witt Jr.'s approach to rushing the quarterback, getting after the quarterback, having this piece here? I think it might. I also think maybe it just is something that adds on, like you kind of keep your same foundational stuff, and then you say, hey, this is the stuff we can do now that Vaughn is here and Dorrance is healthy and all those types of things. So I'm just really curious about it. I like the addition. I like the signing. I think he's going to provide a lot of, especially if they can be better on first and second down, he's going to provide a lot of value. And I think that's where some of the other moves they've made become really impactful. And we're going to talk about this when we do our defensive line preview. Is like some of those guys, like they're not the biggest names, but if they get you better on first and second down, then he comes in 3rd and 8, 3rd and 7, 3rd and 9. And again, like when it's a passing down as a pass rusher, you have a lot more juice to you. And I think like that's something that, again, could help potentially maximize this signing even more.
Yeah, well, let's dive into that part, and then we can kind of do the back 7 is its own section of the defensive preview, and then we'll hit the offense to wrap things up. But if you think of how Von Miller affects the D-line overall, one, this is a guy that's run a pass rush camp for a lot of years. Like the knowledge that he has should make everyone better. Inside guys, outside guys, like just having a voice like that in the room, in theory, should be the kind of thing that elevates everyone. Nevertheless, what he brings to you on the field of filling a role that they didn't necessarily have filled. But what does that do you think, to the depth chart and the ability for this D line to, coalesce into a really good deep unit. Good, is that the right word? Great, that's probably too much, but like, what are the chances versus like, I don't know, man, this kind of gets them to average, and we'll pray for the best.
Yeah, I think I like the way you describe that. Does this get them above average? Because last year, I think you could argue, like based on production, that they were below average a little bit, right? And so, but I do think what you see is kind of an interesting group, and like we've talked about it a lot over summer. But I think you see a lot of guys who are more specialized than I would have thought. Kind of coming in, like usually you try to find that 3-down defensive end, the 3-down defensive tackle, but now you got a bunch of guys who feel like they're kind of specialty players. Like it feels like Dietrich Wise, if Golden ends up making the team. And again, like that's something that's really interesting to talk about, is like all of a sudden with this addition, like the defensive line room is incredibly dense. You know what I mean? Like it's like, You're like, man, there's a lot of depth here, and everyone kind of has different roles within this depth. So like I think you get your like first and second down group of guys, right? Which to me would be like, Duran, who seems like a 3-down player, Dietrich, Cleland, Dorrance probably to a certain extent, and then probably Kinlaw over Johnny, but like we'll see how that that position battle kind of matriculates over the course of training camp. And then I think you do have a specialty guy in Goldman if he does make the team, like we just talked about. So that to me feels like your first and second down group, and then I think you kind of transition into that third down position group where it's like you get Vaughn, you get Kinlaw, you get Duran, you get Dorrance, and then you get Frankie Louvu in some type of pass rushing situation. And that feels like a completely different group almost in terms of utilization. But that first group needs to do well. And that's the other thing I'm so interested about with regards to training camp is like, who is in that group? Because right now it feels like Cleland, Dietrich, Dorrance are kind of the guys that I'd use there, but maybe Holmes makes a push and kind of finds the rotational
Jalen Holmes
element.
is the guy, like if I was going to highlight someone, considering how he played last year and the way he played, Jalen Holmes feels like he should be in that first and second down group. Like he was really good as an edge setter last year. Like he plays hard, he plays physical. Maybe not the most talented guy in the world pass rush wise, but like he feels like he should be in that group.
And again, like this is one of those things that's kind of tough because like look at the contract values and like look at how they kind of like he started the season. Did he start on practice squad or he kind of was like up and down?
I think he did. I think he started on practice squad and then got elevated.
And so do you feel like you could get him to practice squad? And like that's where in terms of like 53-man roster projection, like Dietrich is a guy that kind of sought out. They didn't pay him a ton of money, but they paid him enough, right? We haven't even talked about Jacob Martin in terms of his pass rush upside. He feels like another guy that could be kind of in that third down pass rush group. But I went back and watched some of his stuff with the Bears. Like he did some nice stuff on first and second down as well. So that to me, this group is really interesting because it really comes down to roles and utilization. And I think Von Miller's addition is kind of this stone in the lake that's causing all these ripple effects. And I think could change the dynamic of how you view this group. So I don't know. It's interesting because I do feel like there's like two teams that need to be made here on the defensive line. One is the group on first and second down, and one is the third down group. And I think Vaughn is just based on the number he got at signing, $6 million guaranteed, total of $10 million. He feels like the guy that's going to kind of be an anchor of that pass rushing group. But in terms of the other players, I think there's still a lot of competition and a lot of roles that need to be identified, which again, I think is really interesting and really compelling in terms of something to watch for training camp.
Yeah, Carl Davis, Sheldon Day obviously played really well for guys that kind of came in last year. They're going to fight for some of those interior spots. Martin's the guy, like if I'm Jacob Martin and I see the Von Miller signing, I go, damn it. Like just because he's the pass rush specialty guy and he was kind of the only one in that realm. And now, he's going to be competing with Von Miller, but also with Javonte Jean-Baptiste. Like Andre Jones Jr., who made the team last year and is still around, even though he was a 7th round pick in Rivera's last year. But like his special teams value is pretty high because he's really fast and runs down and plays hard on teams. So there's some interesting guys. Norrell Pollard had a very nice camp last year. He's still floating around on the back end. So there is, probably like 14 guys fighting for 9 spots. And like, the top 7 or 8 are probably taken. But I do think this is a very, very interesting group. I also wonder how thin they go at linebacker to create some more space. So we're going to do a a 53-man roster projection on the radio show today, and I have no idea how that's going to pan out still. Because, AKA, I haven't done it yet. We haven't pre-done it. We're going to do it live. That's what we do on the radio, Logan. We do it live. Anything else on the D-line that we want to hit before we get into the back seven?
Yeah, and I think we kind of touched on this already. I think there's a lot of solid football players, but it's roles, it's opportunities, and kind of how the staff sees these guys. And I think that's something that is maybe different than was last year. We were talking about this in the production meeting. It's not like there's like a position battle, but it's like, who's going to be the starting first down defensive end? Like, that is an interesting kind of conversation because we don't really know. I mean, like, you can assume. But
Lawrence is going to be on one side. Who's on the other?
Yeah. And so, like, how does that go? And then who's going to be the nose guard, right? Because I'm assuming Duran's going to play 3 technique. Is it Kinlaw? Do they kind of flip-flop those roles? Like, that's going to be interesting too. So
that's interesting. You think Duran's going to play 3 tech? For years he's been stuck as the 1 because John was playing the 3 techs. You think he's going to flip over?
I think if I think about who my best defensive lineman is at the moment, it's probably Duran's in the conversation. And where do you put your most impactful interior defensive player? You put him at 3 technique, right? And so and that's interesting because I also think that Kinlaw, for an example, is a better 3 technique than a shade, right? I think Drazan's a better 3 technique than a shade. And this is something that Dallas kind of ran into for years. You had a bunch of 3 techniques, but you didn't have a true nose, so like that's where, Goldman is interesting to me because it's like, he is a true nose, but like, they didn't pay him a ton of money to come in. He wasn't at OTAs. He wasn't at minicamp. Like, he feels like the thing they absolutely have to have in this defense to be good against the run on first, second down. But do they say, hey, we want to be fast. We want to be versatile. We want to be athletic on the interior. And again, those are the decisions that right now you can speculate about, but you don't really get concrete information until you start watching training camp practice. So that to me is why this group is so interesting. It's like, because there's not like battles necessarily, but there's spots open. Who's the nose guard? Who's the other defensive end? Those are going to be interesting position battles because I think it could be Holmes, it could be Duchik, it could be anybody, right? And then who's going to kind of solidify themselves as that pass rushing subgroup? And like, do you have to keep more guys on the defensive line to get that done? So like, do you keep 10? Do you keep 11 on the defensive line because you want that the kind of the platooning of the groups? And again, when you're doing a roster prediction, these are things you have to consider big time. But I do think it's more interesting than I think a lot of people want to give credit for.
For sure. And then, there was times at last year when like it was Day and Duran, like that was the better combo. Because like Sheldon Day just did his job as a pro and not going to be an impactful playmaker, but like he'll eat a double team. And so like what kind of combos do those down roster guys have on first and second down, especially first down, to make this all kind of come together and coalesce? All right. Offense and defense preview coming. Let's get to the back seven on the defensive side here on Take Command. Take Command. That's Logan Paulsen. I am Craig Hoffman, and we're talking about the Commanders' defense here in our preview episode. Just wrapped with the defensive line, Logan. So the linebackers, like in some way, this is very, very easy and straightforward. Frankie Louvu and Bobby Wagner are going to start. Okay, that's the linebacker preview. They're going to play close to 100% of the snaps. That said, that third linebacker spot, how much it's going to be used. A fourth linebacker spot, which is kind of this, in some ways, hybrid position between secondary and linebacker, feels like it's going to be in play as well. And then obviously, like, what happens if Bobby or Frankie goes down at some point and this is a game or two? Like, that becomes an interesting question. So the straightforwardness is I think, very shallow. It's very thin. But there's actually a lot to dive into under the surface here with this linebacker position.
Yeah, I think the linebacker group this year specifically is also interesting. Is more interesting than it was last year, for example, because I think obviously Bobby and Frankie are going to be the guys that play a lot, but you have some kind of interesting pieces in the back end. And I do think that there's going to be a push because, one of the things we've talked about this entire offseason is to be better on first and second down, right? And so one of the ways to do that is to be better against the run is to get more run stopping players on the field. And so why not get into a 4-3 base as opposed to straight nickel? You know what I'm saying? So
yeah, and I think they led the league in nickel snaps last year.
Right.
So and there's only one direction to really go on the personnel front.
Right. And so do you say, okay, well, we want to go kind of 3 traditional linebackers. We want to go Jordan McGee, Frankie Louvu, Bobby Wagner, right? Or is that third linebacker kind of something more akin to what they did in Dallas, where it's Dominique Hampton? He's kind of this big nickel. Is it Tyler Owens? Is it,
Kane Medrano.
Kane Medrano. Like, that's where I think this becomes interesting, is obviously the two guys are established, right? But then what is the direction and what is the look of the position moving forward? Because it's really going to frame the defense, right? Like, if we want to go three kind of thumping linebackers, then McGee's going to be on the field, and that's going to feel a certain way, right? That's going to feel very specific. Or we want to go big nickel, and we say, hey, like, we've got these big, long, kind of rangy safety kind of hybrid type guys. And then all of a sudden those three linebackers give you a little bit more flexibility. Maybe you're not quite as good as against the run. But I think that, to me, in terms of packaging, like we talked about with the defensive line, how there's like, who's going to play the nose, who's going to play the off end on first and second down. Here, like, this really, to me, is like kind of the story of what the defense is going to look like, right? And again, maybe they don't know for sure. I think they should, like any good coach, you have an idea of what you want going into training camp. And then obviously guys play themselves into roles, play themselves out of roles. Like, for example, Mike Sanderson might be the greatest nickel of all time. You know what I mean? And he might be awesome in run support. And you say, well, we can be a nickel a lot, and he's going to do a great job with that. We don't know, right? But he's got to play his way into that, showing that he can do that, right? So
Right.
that's something that I think is really interesting about the position, is like, if you kind of say they want to be more physical, then you say, let's get three linebackers on the field. But I don't want to hurt myself in coverage. So does that become kind of a tweener spot, right? Where it's like, maybe Will Harris is the big nickel or whatever. And I think that's something that I really am excited to see, is this really is going to shape how the defense looks, right? And like, maybe it's a little bit bigger, a little bit more physical, a little bit more downhill, a little bit more say, hey, we're going to trust and again, that would inform a lot of information about the secondary and how they feel about those guys in man-to-man coverage situations, right? So this is really compelling to me, because it's like, shoot, do we want to be big downhill thumping, or are we going to kind of try to be half between nickel and big thumping with one of these more hybrid type players? Because they've talked about, we need to find a role for Tyler Owens. Like, can we get Dominique Hampton on the field? Can we get Jordan McGee on the field? And this is the spot where I think a lot of those guys and a lot of the competition intersects, because not only does it shape the way the defense looks, but it also shows a strength and a weakness for the defense moving into the season.
For sure. And they tried to kind of go the halfway route last year in a way that was a little easier personnel wise, because Jeremy Chin is a safety who's built like a linebacker. And so he just lived in the box for a lot of time. And, while Mikey was on the field and they're in nickel, like, Chin was able to fit some of the run stuff in a more significant way. And depending on how you scheme it up, like how much two high shell you're playing versus single high shell, like you can kind of interchange, all right, who's the safety, who's the nickel, those kinds of things. Will Harris will thump. Like, Will Harris is a big hitter, but he's not quite Jeremy Chin. And so, like, he's an option there, but do you want Medrano, Hampton, like a true linebacker body type? Although, those guys are the same size as Chin, which is kind of the point. Like, do you want that type on the field? I think then the other big question to me at this second level is, like, also, what do these guys look like in coverage? Like, because if Jordan McGee can cover and you can play
he can. I'm not saying
decent coverage, yeah. If you don't have a significant drop off in base, like, that's a huge win. Like, if you can play base defense and still not feel like you're at a disadvantage in coverage, like, you should do that. That's going to discourage running, getting easy yardage and put you in good situations. Eventually, you can probably play some of the same personnel groupings with a nickel, knowing the play call. Like, they think you're going to do X, you're able to do Y, so you're able to keep the offense off balance. So, like, there's a lot of different stuff that you can do when you have this much versatility. I think what the mistake sometimes we make from the outside, and sometimes coaches make this too, to be honest, is you fall in love with the options and realize that none of them are actually that good. And I'm curious, I'm not saying that they don't have good options. What I'm curious about, as I know you are, is which one emerges as the good option.
Right.
And if you have multiple good ones, great. If McGee is good and Hampton or Medrano is good, or whatever combo, like, sick. Having a menu of really good options is ideal. But if one emerges as the clear best option, what does that look like? I think that is a really intriguing thing. And then what is the personnel that fits that good, pairing or group?
Yeah, and I think that to me, that's the story. Like, kind of like, not for I guess for the defense, really. Like, because again, it's going to inform a lot about who this team wants to be. But again, that's what I'm saying. It's like, you probably go into camp with an idea of who you want to be, but like, Tyler Owens ends up being an absolute dog as like the extra big nickel player. And like that comes out of, and I don't want to say it comes out of nowhere because they've alluded to wanting to get him more involved, but like, we're
Right.
talking about linebacker body types here, and he's the guy that ends up getting the job. Right. So, and again, like that's where training camp, that this is why it's important, right? We put the pads on, we see what guys can do in these new roles, right? Because again, he played true safety special teams guy last year, right? And he was in the box in the preseason a little bit, but he was there as a safety. Like this is going to be a different ball of wax. You got a rookie in Cam Medrano. I mean, Dominique Hampton's really interesting to me because he looked great in the preseason as a linebacker spot. They kept him on the active roster the whole year. They don't want to lose him. He feels like he'd be the perfect fit for this, but can he do it? He kind of played middle linebacker. He was like the third middle linebacker in OTAs and minicamp. Like, does that kind of show the direction they want him to be preparing for? And then obviously Jordan McGee, who again, I like, but he was hurt a lot
They
last year.
love,
So
they love him.
can he kind of figure that spot out, and can he cover? Because like when you watch him at Temple, like he's got some range, he's got some ability. And so I think this is the defensive line stuff is interesting for sure. But I think this is where this is the identity of the defense at this level, right? Because of the flexibility of that third element. And I think that's why, again, we're going to go out on Wednesday. We're going to watch practice, and I'm going to be like, oh my gosh, who's playing the nickel spot? But then it's going to be somebody different on Thursday. And it's going to be someone different on Friday, because that's how they did it last year. They just kind of had a constant rotation of players in there because they want to figure out exactly what you're describing, Craig.
Right. And it's tough because I can make an argument they should have a package of true 3-4. Let's stick Goldman at the nose. Let's stick Kinlaw and Duran at these 4 eye spots. And then let's have McGee and Bobby on the field and Von Miller and Frankie on the edges. That works on paper, but how much time do you want to dedicate to that versus, no, we're a 4-down team. All these decisions and the exploration of options come with downside of you're not practicing something else. Eventually you have to own the stuff that you do. And every second you try, or every rep that you spend trying something new is a rep you could be spending owning something that you've already done. And you've got to make those, that is coaching at the NFL level, is deciding how much experimentation is worth it, how much variety is worth it versus how much do we just own the stuff that we know we're going to do. And because there are so many different potential body types, so many different, because even Medrano versus Owens versus Hampton, and we're talking about kind of a fourth, if McGee's in his own box as a third linebacker, we're talking about a fourth linebacker that could help shape this defense. It's an interesting spot to be in. But also do they have a package where a dime package where maybe they take Bobby off the field or Frankie off the field in a 3rd and long situation? So I think there's a lot to chew on there. And then, as you mentioned, there's how that interacts with the secondary. I think the corner spot's pretty straightforward at this point. I think Mikey's going to get his shot at the nickel. Jonathan Jones will back him up. You've got Trey Amos on the outside and Marshawn on the outside. And as long as all those guys play well in camp, they don't get smoked by someone else, those are going to be the starters. I think it becomes interesting if one of those guys doesn't play well, specifically, Lattimore's going to play pretty much no matter what. If he's not good, that's a whole separate conversation. We can cross that bridge when it comes. But I think if Amos isn't ready yet, what they do becomes pretty interesting. Do you kick Mikey back outside and put Jones in the slot? Do you just put Jones on the outside? So that becomes interesting. Noah's still floating around, he's the depth piece, but I think the corner spot, and to it, the 2 starting safeties with Quan and Will Harris, that's all pretty straightforward.
So it is straightforward, but I think the storyline about the secondary is not necessarily the depth, because I think we all are very familiar with it. To me, it's where do they get to by the end of training camp? When they get through those, the 3rd preseason game, are they good enough where Joe Wick Jr. can play as much man as he wants? That to me is the question. Because he came in last season, wanted to play a lot of man. They couldn't do that. They had to kind of shift gears, get into some different stuff. And right now it's on paper, you look at Trey Amos, look at his OTA minicamp period, look what he did well in college, look at Lattimore, look at Mike Sanders still in the slot, look at Quan, look at Harris, kind of bringing those 5 guys together. You say, on paper, they should be able to do what he wants from a coverage standpoint. And the question is, are they good enough to get that done? That's my $1 million question. It's not necessarily a depth thing. It's developmentally, where are they at? Health-wise, where are they at? And can we be, or can they be the defense that I think Joe Witt wants them to be, where we're hyper aggressive in man coverage, we're blitzing a lot, and we're kind of dictating terms to the defense in a way that we talked about with the defensive coordinator preview. And so that's where it's like, yes, on paper, like there are some interesting kind of fluctuations in terms of position, but I think this is more, again, like we talked about that nickel spot. Who do we want to be defensively? And this group, I think, is going to shape that probably more than any other position group we've talked about.
For sure. And yet you're exactly right. Like that identity piece of like how much too high, how much single high, how much man, how much zone, how many, and really like to me, this is the key question, right? If you're trying to like boil it down sports TV style into one question, how much, although they never ask this question on sports TV, it's way too nuanced. How many bodies do you have in coverage?
Yeah.
Like on a regular basis versus how many can we commit to blitzing? And again, maybe they don't have to do as much in terms of the committing to blitzing because of a guy like Von Miller. Like this is where it all kind of comes together. But I think we know based off of Joe's past, of Dan's past, like they want to get after the quarterback. They want to send extra bodies because they want to invite some variance, and they want to invite some chaos because they want the turnovers. And like that's the thing that I think is really interesting that they didn't get last year is they want to invite the amount of variance that causes you to turn the football over, and as opposed to just like, yes, they want to be more solid on first and second down, but it's so they can get to those third down or those second and longs where teams feel pressure, they feel like they need to force it, and we get to that. Two stats I want to run by you real quick. I was reading
also real quick. I never give you your flower. I love that analysis by you. That was great analysis. They want to invite variance. That's good. I love that. Nice job.
I was like, what would Logan say? That sounds smart. And then I said it myself. Two stats that I found fascinating. I was reading our guy Dan Pizzuta, who was with us last week. He sent us the FTN Almanac. And so I was reading Dan's chapter, and there's two stats that I thought were pretty fascinating on the defensive side before we flip to the offense. One, the Commanders had their number one corner on the other team's number one wide receiver only 47% of the time last year, which is one of the lowest rates in the league. Obviously, they weren't like, yeah, let's match Benjamin St. Juste up one-on-one. And it was kind of like, let's see where the guy lines up. Benjamin's playing one side, Mikey's playing the other by the time that Forbes had been kicked out and all that. And then obviously Lattimore's hurt for much of the regular season. They did some shadowing late in the regular season with him and in the playoff game, but really it was kind of just wherever the number one lined up. That's something I think big time to monitor this year is, do they have Lattimore follow number ones, or do they just kind of roll the same way where it's like Lattimore's on one side, Amos is on the other. If they line up their number one somewhere, like that's fine. So that's one thing to, I think, watch. We don't know the answer. We're not going to know the answer till probably a couple weeks into the regular season after we see them. We might know something week one. They play the Giants, so Malik Neighbors, hello. But is it an every week thing? Is it a sometimes thing? Just something to file away, put in your back pocket. Here's the more interesting one I want your reaction to. The Commanders were 9th in overall defense last year in the first half. They were, I think, 31st in the second half. Yeah. So year over year, typically first half production is more stable and a better predictor. And that would be obviously a good thing. Like, oh, okay, structurally, there's some good stuff there. Can they carry that over and then extend it into the second half and be, a top half, if not top 10 defense overall this year? They finished, I think, 23rd overall because of how bad the second halves were. But what do you make of that that first half stat and the ability for them to now extend that into, playing 60 minutes of good football?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And it's something that we probably should do a whole show on, quite honestly, because it's that kind of thing where I'd like to go back and watch some film and watch some first half to second half stuff. I think one of the things that sticks out to me, just kind of thinking through teams that I've been on that have had similar issues, is if you're playing with a lead going into the second half of a ball game, that's where you really want to be hunting as a pass rushing team, right? That's where you really want to have teeth to that group. And if you don't have any teeth, and you can't kind of impact the passer when a team has to pass, they're going to get after you a little bit. You know what I'm saying? I think that's something that I would point to also, in addition to that lack of kind of elite pass rush, which hopefully has been rectified this year with Von Miller. The other thing too is when you're in close games and everything's on the table, offenses get better in the second half usually, right? Because they've seen what you've done in the first half. Thinking about my time as an offensive player, it's oh, they're going to play cover 3 to this. They're going to bring this pressure on third down. This is what they want to be. now we can adjust and we can go, and we don't have to get out of our base game plan. So I think, think about all the 1-score games they were in. Think about how aggressive offenses are in those situations. Think about kind of what's on the table and how hard it is to defend those teams. I think that's something that probably also impacts that second half production, but getting a pass rush is going to help. And also I think improving the offense is going to be a big deal. And that's something we're going to talk about here in a second. But I think the idea of playing complementary football, and if the offense can take a lead and maintain a lead and find explosive opportunities, that's going to de-leverage the defense, especially in those second half.
Take Command Podcast, Super 2025 Preview Edition. Again, all football on the show today. If you want more on the RFK Stadium latest and all of the news around that, I actually have an update from when we started recording, Logan. You ready for this?
Yeah.
The one, the only, John Keim is going to join me on the radio today at 5 o'clock.
Love that.
If you are listening to this before 5 o'clock on Tuesday, make sure that you tune in then. If you're listening to this after, or you're not going to be available, in this same place that you're listening right now, you can listen to the Hoffman Show podcast after the interview happens. So no matter where you get your pods, we're in all the same places. So you can check out Keim and I. We'll do some football stuff too. But if you want more on kind of what's going on with the RFK Stadium deal, Keim will join me at 5 o'clock today. So with that said, let's talk about the offense, Logan. I think the big storyline for those people that haven't been listening all offseason, tuning back in, like I need my training camp preview, is we think that on first and second down, they are better built to be sustainable this year. Last year, they figured a lot of stuff out on third and fourth down. I assume they'll be super aggressive on fourth down again. Chances that they're like the best fourth down team ever 2 years in a row don't seem very high from a likelihood standpoint, but Jaden was really good in those situations. So I do think they'll probably still be up there in terms of success rate on fourth down this year. But the offensive line, they clearly figured out how to work around last year. And they were like, what happens if we don't have to work around it? What if it's a feature, not a bug that we're having to patch all the time? And that, I think, is the biggest setup outside of like how good is Jaden Daniels in year 2 and what happens with Terry McLaurin to the 2025 Commanders offense.
Yeah, that offensive line is definitely like a huge storyline for sure. And I think everyone on paper, I think you and I both are like really encouraged by the athleticism that they've gained. Laramie Tunsil, Brandon Coleman, a guard, Biotish coming back, being able to take Allegretti, Wiley in Cosby's absence and put him in there. And then Connerly Jr., like the athlete that he is, like that's really exciting. I think the thing that I just am probably most compelled by with this group is two things. One is, how does the offense change now that you have this great offensive line or this more athletic offensive line? And two, and maybe more importantly, how does that group come together, right? Because like I've played a part, with offensive lines that on paper were not very good, but on the field are very good, right? Because it's 5 people. And I was talking with an offensive line coach that I have a lot of respect for, and he was saying like, it's a hard job because you got to get 5 people to see it the same exact way. And sometimes like with different personalities and different study habits, like that doesn't always happen. So, I'm really curious to see if they can get that done. Like, and, Coach Johnson did a great job last year. Cliff did a great job last year of kind of helping that group come along. But to me, like that is the main storyline, because on paper you say, man, like athlete wise, like they've invested draft capital. They've built this thing the way you have to build an elite offensive line. Like this is all good. This is going to help Jaden Daniels. It's going to help the pass game. It's going to help the run game. And that's and I don't think that's a crazy assertion, but to me, it's really like week 3 of training camp. How do these dudes look during team blitz on the field? Because if they're not coming together, like all of these positive things that we've talked about are going to be a little bit more muted, because we got to kind of go back to some of the stuff we were doing last year.
Yeah, for sure. Jaden was unbelievable against the blitz last year.
Mm-hmm.
Just like historically great for a rookie. So that is something where it's like, just be decent against the blitz as an O-line. Don't have a direct kill shot immediately, and Jaden will probably figure it out. Is assuming that he can be as good again in year 2 as he was in year 1. Another thing that I pulled from the FTN Almanac that I thought was interesting, we talk about the athleticism of the offensive line. They ran outside zone at the lowest rate of any team in the league last year, which is I mean, I'll ask you, like, what do you make of that? Because it feels like to me they had an identity. It's like we're going to run a lot of this gap scheme stuff, and like we're going to own it. Teams caught on a little bit later in the year. Also, some of the linemen were banged up, and it became a little less effective because guys weren't playing as well. And injury was a part of that. Even if guys weren't out, they just didn't have the pop, the power, the athleticism to run some of the bounce, some of the GT, some of the whatever they were running. But I think that's interesting, and they had the identity. Like, how much do they lean back into that same identity and own it this year versus the ability to change it up and kind of establish a new identity for a 2025 Commanders offense?
I think that goes back to one of those fan questions we had, whatever that was, a couple weeks ago, about how much under center work do they want to be in, right? Or how much pistol work, how much dot do they want to be in? Because I will say, like, outside zone from the gun is not a great play usually, right? It just, like, the timing is a little bit weird. You need to kind of be creative. The angles aren't quite as good because the backs relationship, because like an outside zone, like you got the center, right? And think about if I'm in the gun, I'm the quarterback and the back's offset left and we're running outside zone right. Because like it's really hard to run outside zone because I got to pitch it to that left side, right? The back has to cross my body. And usually a good rule of thumb for outside zone is you want to stack the center. So how quickly can the back stack the center? And so automatically when they're an offset gun, like that's really hard to do, right? Because like he's got to really either run fast laterally, which is not great because outside zone, one of the things is you're running downhill laterally so you can put your foot in the ground and fall forward. So it's just not a great, in my opinion, I'm sure you could find somebody who loves outside zone from the gun. In my opinion, not a great play. So to me, what are you going to lean into? You're going to lean into tight zone, going to lean into gap scheme stuff. And if you think about it, like how do we protect those runs? You get into RPO, you get into zone read, you get into variations on the pin pull stuff, like our trap kind of looks like our bounce, and so they fit it differently. You know what I'm saying? So like that's where I think the advantage is. And I do think you'll probably see a lot of the same stuff from a run. I'm sure you'll see wrinkles because Cliff's a smart guy. Coach Johnson's a smart guy. But I think you'll see a lot of the same stuff just because of how they've structured the offense, right? Like when you do not have tight ends attached, fullbacks attached, it becomes much harder to find angles if you're not running gap scheme stuff, in my opinion, right? And so I think that's where you'd say like they probably are going to be similar. Now, I do think that's okay because Brandon Coleman runs a 4.9, Laramie Tunsil runs a 4.9, Josh Connolly runs a 4.9. Like you can get those guys in space into the perimeter in a way that is going to be advantageous. But I think that's just something to kind of keep an eye on from a football philosophy standpoint. So I think you're going to see a lot of the same stuff. It probably will be executed a little bit better because the athletes are better. And then I think you add on the pass protection element, which to me is the main thing that they're bringing, because we talked about being better on first, second down. Them being better in pass protecting situations is going to help you access the middle of the field a little bit more. So yeah, again, that's kind of where I think the real advantages of the offensive line improvements.
Yeah, I think what you just talked about of how the offense goes together, where it's like they can still, like a lot of teams, why outside zone, or one of the reasons outside zone is so popular is like it's one of the easiest actions to play action off of. Like you get that nice extension. Oh, look, the ball. Oh, I pulled it. Now, it takes a lot of time. That way the receivers can get downfield. But like Cliff did such a nice job last year of saying like, all right, well, we're going to do this like trap pop pass where it's like, it's trap, just kidding. Like we're faking the handoff. But now we've got the protection. We've got a good pocket. We've moved the pocket a little bit. Jaden's mobility is an asset here. Even off a tight zone, because Jaden can boot off of that. Like he's got the mobility that we can still have a cohesive offense. And that allowed them to trick some of that stuff up. Now you have all that stuff still on the table, plus hopefully more just straight drop back where Jaden doesn't have to worry about getting his head blown off because they've got the better pass protection. I think that's a fascinating thing to watch from a structure standpoint, and we'll see how that holds up, obviously, fairly quickly. New York, again, week one, excellent defense, excellent front, so they'll be challenged immediately. From a personnel standpoint, I think we should rehash quickly, like, if Terry is not here, which I don't think either of us think that is going to happen.
Right.
But like that is a huge game changer offensively. He is their best downfield threat by a mile. He commands true number one attention. And he, to me, is the key to unlocking everything else in the pass game. Like, Debo is less effective if Terry's not there. Obviously, guys like Luke and on down the list, your Jalen Lanes, your Noah Browns, if he's got to take on some of that stuff, it's not going to work as well, and the attention is going to be different. And so some of the other things you're trying to do in the screen game and downfield passing, et cetera, just become, I don't want to say impossible, but they become much, much, much more difficult if Terry is unavailable. When it comes to McLaurin and the contract getting it done, like, how far into camp can this go before you're like, okay, we're having a serious effect on the season here?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I'd probably say all the way to week 1, if I'm being totally, like, knowing Terry in the limited, my limited interaction with him, like, he's a pro's pro. He knows the offense, right? Like, knowing his relationship with Jaden, like, I think they'll be able to figure it out. I'm sure Terry's in shape. I think that's the other element that I would point to too. So I think all the way to week 1, you'd probably be okay. I don't think it goes that long, but if it did, I think, like, maybe there's a little rust week 1, but just getting him on the field, having him run around, doing what he does well in terms of the physicality at the catch point, like, all that stuff's transferable. So I wouldn't be that concerned about it. But again, like, it's something that is definitely kind of looming over the team as you walk towards the season. Because again, like, he had a special year last year. He did a good job. And so, like, if you remove him from the equation, like, I do think you can survive, with Noah Brown, but Noah Brown hasn't been healthy for a whole season, basically ever. Right. Debo Samuel, again, like, very special player, but very specific type of player, also has a little bit of an injury bug associated with him. So it becomes
Michael Gallup, same thing, on down the list.
Yeah. So it becomes a really interesting group, because I do think it's a talented group, and I think it can offset. If Terry's not here, it can offset, but it's not the healthiest group, and so I think that's where, like, kind of maybe it increases the urgency. I don't know, but I do like the receiving group. I think it's got a lot of playmakers. I think they complement each other really, really well. I think when Terry's there, it kind of, and Noah Brown and Debo, it kind of all falls into place really nicely, and it allows you to kind of say, oh, then Lane can have a specific role, Luke can have a specific role, and you're like, okay, all of a sudden I feel really good about it. But if one of those guys, Lane or Luke, is bumped up the depth chart for whatever reason, injury or anything you can think of, like, all of a sudden you're like, man, I don't love him taking, going from 15 snaps to 30 snaps, because he's kind of learning on the job, which is a fine way to do it. And I think Jaden Daniels can offset some of that, but I think the group becomes much less consistent, I think, with that. And I think, I'm not saying those players aren't going to be good, but I think there is a little bit of a drop off.
Yeah. Are there any players that you are really watching to take a jump or to maybe play a bigger role than people anticipate? So if I just run through some options here real quick, right? Like, you have all the running backs, and it would seem on paper that, like, Robinson, Eckler, McNichols, they're just back, but you have Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt coming in as a 7th rounder. We're not going to have any idea what he is really until farther into camp, when they put the pads on and start doing some actual quasi, as live as you're allowed to in the modern NFL running stuff. Obviously, I think there's a lot of eyes on Ben Sinnott at the tight end spot, and what role does he carve out with Zach Ertz back and ready to do the Zach Ertz stuff? John Bates is going to do the John Bates stuff. Like, where does Sinnott fit in? What is the Ben Sinnott stuff? And I know that we could probably do another 30 minutes on the tight end room, because you love everybody in that room. But then at the wide receiver spot, you've got Luke, you've got Jalen Lane. So, like, there's some interesting guys that have higher upside than certainly anything they've done in the league so far. In the rookies' case, they haven't done anything. But is there someone you're kind of watching you think could emerge into a significant role for this team on a regular basis, whether it's one of those guys or maybe one of the veterans that they've brought in that you don't think gets enough attention?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the one guy of the guys you just mentioned is Merritt, is Ja'Cory Merritt. Like, he's the guy that, to me, and again, he's a rookie, so it's not like he's going to take a step necessarily, but he just, like, his college film is so good that I just feel like he's going to find a way into the rotation, into the conversation, let's say, right? And so, like, how much does he end up playing? I have no idea, but he feels like the guy that's kind of most poised to make waves. You mentioned Ben Sinnott. Like, I've talked about Zach Ertz and John Bates and the pros that I think they are and the professionals that they bring and how well they played last year. He's going to have to do a lot get past those guys, right? And if there's an injury to one of them, like he's gonna have to step in and kind of learn on the job. Also, I think Luke had a really nice offseason, So I think he might be closer than I originally thought, like before the OTA minicamp cycle started. So he's a guy that I think is maybe scratching on like kind of starters kind of minutes. And so we'll see what happens there. But those are the three guys that I kind of look to and I say, in order, it's probably Merritt, Luke, and then Ben in terms of guys that I think are going to make an impact this year. And again, if Zach gets hurt and Ben has a larger role, like I think he could have a larger role this year, but he just has a bigger mountain to climb because I think those two guys in front of him are doing so well. And we talked about with the receiver group how there's a lot of injury history, there's kind of specialized roles, and I do think Luke has played a lot better in OTAs. So him getting opportunities would be great.
We talked about this in OTAs, but for those that were checked out for the offseason, like he looked like a different athlete. Like on paper, Luke McCaffrey, testing numbers, all that kind of stuff. You're like, wow, this is a pretty special athlete. And then you saw that speed, you saw the quickness, like you saw all that stuff show up in training camp or in OTAs in a way that we just didn't see for him as a rookie. Like the game was fast for him, and now it's like, oh, he's fast for the game. And so if that translates into regular season play, I think that's really exciting. The other, obviously, the one starting position battle that really exists on the team, like obviously we'll see like Gallup and Noah Brown. They're all going to be in a rotation at that wide receiver 2, if you will, spot. Debo's in kind of his own bucket, is whatever he is. He's like the true wide receiver 2, but in terms of the guy who's going to get the second most targets at that position behind Terry. But like the one position battle that actually exists for a starting spot on the roster is going to be at right guard. And that's because Sam Cosmi's injured. The three guys to watch there, Nick Allegretti, who I would say is probably the incumbent guy shifting over from left guard to right guard, but Nate Erbig, who they brought in from Pittsburgh, and then Andrew Wiley kicking down inside. So that's going to be an interesting thing to watch. They seem to have committed to Brandon Coleman at left guard, Connerly at right tackle. Those guys will cross-train a little bit, but I'm excited to see kind of how that plays out. Any other things that you're really watching for offensively? I mean, we haven't even talked really that much about Jaden. We just kind of take it for granted how good he is, but anything else offensively, Jaden, line, otherwise you want to talk about before we wrap up here?
Yeah, I think that's the other thing. Obviously the line is, we talked, to me, that's the main storyline, kind of in conjunction with the receivers, the depth chart there and how that works out, how they come together. But I think Jaden, I'm just curious to see how the offense looks in year 2. Like what steps has Cliff taken to add, you know what I mean? And, to help Jaden grow. And I think he did such a good job of managing what he was asking Jaden to do last year, and Jaden did a good job handling it. So like as a coach, I think this is like for Cliff, like the $1 million question is like, he did excellent with this. I can't keep at this because we have to take a step, but how big is the step and what does the step look like? And so what are we now emphasizing from the playbook, right? Like, we did a lot of quick game, a lot of RPO, a lot of kind of pre-snap run reads. We were really run focused to kind of offload some of that stuff. Do we get into more of a, kind of traditional NFL model of saying, hey, like we can get into some drop back stuff on first down, right? Because we trust Jaden's going to make the right decision. These are the concepts that he likes to see. Can we call those a little bit more frequently? So that's something that I think is going to be really, really interesting to watch, especially going through training camp. Like what is the offensive staff emphasizing for Jaden to maximize him? And then how does that, because again, we always talk about how it kind of, the offseason kind of goes in phases. You have your OTA mini camp, right, where you kind of try some stuff out. Training camp, you're kind of a little bit more concrete. And then you get into the season, it's like the first 3 games, this worked, this didn't. And then it kind of sets the table for the rest of the year. So that's something that I'm really interested about. And we've talked about some of the things they could do with the offensive line improvement or projected improvement. But yeah, that Jaden is going to be such a big driver and obviously in this team's success. And so like what has the staff, they've done such a good job of insulating him. How do they kind of continue to watch his maturity going into year 2? Because again, we've seen CJ Stroud struggle, right? We've seen guys struggle in year 2. Like how do you kind of make sure that this is a seamless process and you win a bunch of games because he feels very comfortable?
Yeah, and as we've talked about a lot throughout the offseason, I don't have a ton of concern that the CJ Stroud thing is going to happen because unlike where Houston had a mess of an offensive line in year 1 and kind of a mess of a structure offensively at CJ, and CJ was able to overcome a lot of that stuff on third down and just like be awesome. Like the Commanders had some of that, but not as bad as Houston did, and they upgraded. Like, they made everything easier, and they improved the structure around Jaden Cliff, a much more experienced and better play caller than Bobby Slowick was. But then I think the other kind of funny thing is, like, we're talking about this structure, and can they more NFL it? They also made the easy buttons better.
Yeah.
Like, oh, we have Deebo Samuel. Just throw him the ball and watch him run. Like, they want to make sure that those easy buttons still exist, because if you can have success with very minimal risk and easy buttons, why would you have to add and invite more variance and more risk into the offense? And so I think that they understand we're really good at this stuff. Mm-hmm. So, like, if we can have a high reward, low risk, why wouldn't we do that? And a guy like Deebo goes a long way. Jalen Lane in the long run, hopefully, or maybe even the short term, with what kind of weapon and speeds that he's got. That's a guy that is going to be helpful. And then we'll obviously see what they have for Terry schemed up in year 2, assuming that the contract gets done. All right, so that's our show for this week. Hope you feel very ready for training camp. I am on the road and out, so I will not be able to be at training camp, but Logan will be. So I will ask you all of the questions that you want to know of someone of Logan Paulsen's caliber that was at training camp on our show at the end of the week. So we're probably looking at Thursday or Friday for that. So make sure you're subscribed. As soon as the episode hits, you will get it. Of course, you can watch us on YouTube at the Team 980. And at 106.7 The Fan as well. And then next week, we're in it. Like, we're in more training camp stuff, and we will continue to evaluate what's going on. We'll do maybe some roster projections, all that kind of stuff. We might still hit a few mailbag questions, although that's mostly an off-season thing. We have a couple good ones that are saved up, but if you have something you think is relevant, you want to send it in, go right ahead. All right, that's it. That's all for Logan. I'm Craig. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on Take Command.